We should be here later. We good? Okay. I didn't start the meeting. It's a unicorn. Shoot. Yep.
If I say we're wrong,
Just needs to reintroduce this new legislation. Because it is council. So withdraw it, just eliminate it, and bring it back and let it form part two. Because we table it, then bring it out of there, you can better off just make it a piece of legislation.
oh yeah, I just said. Sorry.
All right. Councilman Hester's here. We can get going. All right, welcome everybody back this afternoon. We're going to get started on our strategic planning meeting. We had to take a brief recess there for a moment, so we will re-adjourn at this time. Reorder at this time, I guess. Chief, homelessness presentation. Are we good to go now?
We are good to go. So if you could pull this presentation up, I am excited to be able to bring one of our key staffers from the Kelly administration up to give a presentation on our homelessness strategy. He's going to show you a little bit about the challenges that we're currently facing, how these things have changed over the past 5 to 6 years, and what we're doing about it, and what the overall structure to our strategy is. So I'm excited for you all to learn from Sam. Sam comes to us. He did work in the Burke administration, but he also worked on our Fuse project, which is a countywide initiative to address frequent users of our emergency services, as well as our jails, to help get them out of that revolving door. Sam's tremendously qualified, and we're very proud to have him. And so, Sam, come on down and share with these folks what you've learned.
Good afternoon. All right, let's see if we can get this to work. Okay, so I wanted to start off by talking just broadly about the overall numbers around homelessness that we're looking at in our community. But a couple things that we need to qualify about that when we talk about it is the way we've historically measured our homeless population is through a process known as the point in time count, which takes place once every year. It's just a snapshot of what the current number of people experiencing homelessness in January every year is. And it's not a living number of people that will become homeless in any given year. We're working with the Chattanooga Regional Homeless Coalition to get to a better place with our data quality, but by what we'll call a by name list. When we worked with the Burke administration to combat veteran homelessness, that's what we had to kind of measure our success, but we're not quite there yet for regular homelessness. So looking in 2021, we counted 602 people in Hamilton County. We had 364 people that were unsheltered. That was an 80% increase from 2020. We had 236 people that were sheltered. The big takeaway from this, I think, is the 80% increase in our unsheltered homeless population. That's led to more people just being out on the streets. Simultaneously with that, we've actually seen a decrease in the number of our overall homeless encampments. And so that's led to more and more people being concentrated into more and more visible encampments in the community. I, for one, am getting a lot more requests for people complaining about the problems from encampments more so than I have in working with the Burke administration. and it's a really growing problem. Another thing to point out that's kind of been a little bit of a source of confusion is the point in time count measures an 11 county region when they do that. And so that is the 1,482 number. That was a substantial increase from the year prior, but that's actually because they changed the process by which they counted people. So when we talk about like our overall homeless population growing by more than double, that's actually looking at the 11 county region in our community. So that number is actually a 40% increase since 2015 in our local homeless population. So it's just something that we've been able to see over the past few years. The problem is getting worse. When we talk about homelessness too, yes.
Councilwoman, is your light on? I don't have your volume. Oh, it might be your mic. There you go.
Okay. Can you please go back once? Yeah, this slide. Okay, so you were saying that the number has changed because the way we count with regard to 11 counties. So help me understand, we have an 80% increase, but that's across 11 counties, or
The
this 80%
unsheltered increase is just for Hamilton County.
just for Hamilton County? So these numbers, so the 40% increase in total homeless persons is just for Hamilton County?
We actually saw an 40% for the entire COC. We actually, in 2015, we don't know what just Hamilton County was. However, when they were conducting that count at the time, they weren't really counting the 11 counties. And really, even since last year, they counted maybe Bradley County to have an emergency shelter there. And so it was like approximately 20 to 60 people in any given year. So the 40% increase from 2015, it has some other counties, but it's really like predominantly like 98% of the people in that count were in Hamilton County.
So help me understand how those last two bullets can be useful to me as a council person. Help me understand what the value I need to see in those two
Yeah,
bullets.
I think it was just to point out, like, for the total number, there was some information that was reported by a couple news outlets that referenced that 1,400 number. And so I was just pointing out that that's not Hamilton County. It
Okay,
was misquoted.
that
and
is
then-
helpful.
Yes, and then the 40% increase is just to underscore the fact that the problem is getting worse in our community.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Good, Councilwoman.
I'm good.
Hey, Sam, just 1 second.
Hmm?
Councilman Hester.
What is contributing to the increase at 40% homeless growth since 2015? What has changed? What's impacting that?
Yeah,
that growth.
that's something that I touch on in a later slide.
Okay.
Just here in a little bit when we talk about our systems capacity. Before I get to that briefly, I wanted to distinguish between two different kind of subsets of the homeless population. When we talk about our chronic homeless population, those are people who have been homeless for a year or more and have a disabling condition, versus our episodic homeless population, who are more often people living in poverty. When we look at our episodic homeless population, this is the majority of people in our community that are experiencing homelessness. It's as the cost of housing has increased, more and more people in our community are becoming rent burdened or spending more than 30% of their income towards their rent. So in 2019, 44% of Chattanoogan's paid more than 30% of their income towards housing. The type of service we work with people who are episodically homeless is called rapid rehousing, which I'll talk a little bit more about in terms of our system capacity. For our chronic homeless population, again, it's people who have been homeless for a year or more and have a disabling condition. We counted in our 2021 point in time count, 230 people in just Hamilton County. That is very high for a community our size compared to other communities they have in terms of a percentage of their chronic homeless population. It's usually less than that. The best practice that we're working on bringing more capacity around with the Kelly administration is called permanent supportive housing. It's housing with support services, and I'll talk a little bit more about how much of that we have in our community. So some of the key challenges and the kind of the reason why, Councilman Hester, to your question, why it's getting worse is just overarching. Our system capacity is not adequate to meet the need that we have. If you look at affordable housing in our community, the area median income for families since 2015 has only gone up by 23%. For individuals, it's only gone up by 12%. Simultaneously, within that time frame, the cost of a 1-bedroom apartment has gone up by 83% since 2015. So that leads to more and more people becoming homeless as a result of them not being able to pay for their rent. Even in the last year alone, we've seen a 15% increase in the cost of 1-bedroom apartments for people, and that's led to less people getting housed. The amount of dollars that we have every single year to spend to get people off the streets, it's just going not quite as far. Another key indicator in this is what's called our fair market rent rate. That's what the federal government sets in terms of what they'll pay for subsidies from like the housing authority and other federal entitlements. Since 2015, that's only gone up by 20%. So again, the same amount of resources that we've gotten year over year are just not being stretched as far. That trend, unfortunately, continues with our supportive housing needs as well. We had an organization called CSH. They're a national leader in developing supportive housing. They did a needs assessment for our community, and they found that we needed 436 supportive housing beds. That's not just for our homeless, like our chronic homeless population that are out on the streets right now. That's also for people that are involved in our criminal justice system, programs like the FUSE program we're trying to work on. They estimate for our rapid rehousing capacity, we need 329 spots. Talking a little bit more about what supportive housing is specifically, it's affordable housing, but it also is the support services to help people be successful in that housing. Nationwide, supportive housing programs, when working with chronic homeless people, again, like the worst people on our streets, have an 80 to 90% success rate of keeping people in that housing. And as you'll see in a second, we have those types of services in our community. We know that it works and can get people off the streets and keep them off the streets. It just unfortunately is a very expensive service. Looking at the capacity that our system has for permanent supportive housing, we have 469 beds in the whole COC. Again, that's not just Hamilton County, that's the 11 county region. And this number is decreased from 2015. So as our population has increased by 40% since 2015, we have less beds in the permanent supportive housing capacity. This is also something that I wanted to point out, that with this number, that means that there's 469 people who were chronically homeless that stay housed every single year with these supportive services. So again, it's a service that we know works and can be effective. For rapid rehousing, our capacity is decreased from 128 spots within a program to get people off the streets to only 46 spaces currently. So a lot of times when we talk about people needing help and getting off the streets, what it practically means is there's just nowhere for them to go to get help. We have about 80 spots in our permanent supportive housing program that open up every year from people graduating and moving on to other types of housing. But that means for our, roughly for our several hundred chronic homeless people, they have to wait in line for those 80 spots to come available. For our rapid rehousing people, it's the same thing. This problem also carries over to our shelter capacity as well. We have no low barrier shelter in our community. That's like that functions as an emergency shelter. So that's a place where people can go that allows them to stay working kind of non-traditional hours. So if someone's working second shift, they can stay during the day. The emergency shelter that we have now, the rescue mission, they say that they want to, their primary function is to evangelize people. And that's an important service. It's nice that we have that partner that's been providing it, but for people that don't want to participate in their programming, they're not allowed to stay there. Even with that, our shelter capacity has decreased since 2015. Again, there's a trend with our service capacity from 321 spots to only 316 spaces. And for individuals, there's only 72 shelter beds year round for people. That's not including the community kitchens cold weather shelter that is opening up next weekend. They have 160 spaces for people to stay, but those are literally just mats for people to sleep on the floor. And the point of those is to make it so people don't die from the cold, bluntly. And again, if you think about the 364 people that sleep on the street every single night in Hamilton County, there's just not any places for them to go. So now they're giving you the bad news. and talked about how grim things are. What are we doing about it? First and foremost, wanting to provide immediate relief because the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness every night is so high. We're trying to do everything we can to get some interventions quickly off the ground. We're working to connect more individuals to available housing units, even though we have a low inventory. Our Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing is getting people housed every single week. We're actively recruiting landlords. We have some new staff positions within this year's budget that's going to hopefully help us expand that capacity to serve more people. We have a designated encampment that we're working on that I'll touch on more in a little bit. That is a place for people to go because quite frankly, now without the cold weather shelter being open, what is happening every time an encampment gets closed down, we're asked by the people staying there, where can we go? And we just don't have anywhere for them to go. We have nothing to tell them. We're also creating additional housing units through providing incentives for landlords, helping kind of offset some of the costs to make it pencil out for private landlords to rent to people. And we're trying to connect individuals to other additional resources by building new connections that haven't exist. A great example of this is just the kind of the work that the Fuse program is doing in bringing new providers together. And since we've been able to kind of create some new partnerships, the Chattanooga Regional Homeless Coalition is also creating what they're calling the Regional Outreach Collective, which is just hoping to expand our outreach capacity to get more people linked to services. Looking at specifically the sanctioned encampment, the idea is coming from multiple communities in this country that have established similar types of programs. Specifically, we looked at what they're doing in Denver, and I reached out to their homeless service division to kind of talk them through it. And they saw a tremendous results from this program in giving just really cheap capacity, adding cheap capacity to their shelter system to allow people to have a place to stay. It increased the safety, increased the sanity, or the sanitation, thank you, of that area. A lot of problems that we have with our unsheltered homelessness is people defecating on the sidewalks, but from the hours of 5 to 8:30, there's no public restroom on 11th Street for them. They also did not see an increase in crime after its implementation, and were able to link more people to resources. This is a picture of the setup that they had. As you can see, their encampment was close by to a lot of residential places. Where we're looking at is a piece of property on 12th Street that's tucked back behind 11th Street by some kind of industrial areas to kind of have some more additional capacity for people. So those are the short-term interventions that we're working on. In terms of long-term solutions, we know we need to expand our housing inventory for people experiencing homelessness, both permanent supportive housing, with rapid rehousing, just any type of interventions that we can for people. We know we need to fund service providers to come to our community and offer these services for people, because the programs that exist now are just at capacity. So if we're going to help any additional people, it's going to take new commitments to help get them funded. We have the eviction prevention initiatives that we're working on to stop the pipeline of people becoming homeless. It's actually a lot cheaper for us to fund those types of activities, but we know that we have to do those in addition to helping the people that are currently homeless. We are helping to coordinate and interface with our service providers in new and innovative ways. We've been talking to people about stuff like the designated encampment that folks are getting excited about, and just trying to allow space for people to innovate and collaborate around this problem. And we're looking to bring national expertise to Chattanooga. One initiative that the Kelly administration is going to participate in is called House America. It's an initiative by HUD that has a community set 2 goals. One is around a number of people that you will rehouse in a year, and another is around the number of units that you will create within the year. And so our kind of tentative goals at this point in time are 500 households rehoused in a year and 100 new units created. We're also looking at sustainability of these programs. We know we can't just invest in the units in the capital projects. We have to bring real change to our community for these programs to sustain And we won't be looking back 7 years from now and continuing to see the problem grow. We are still looking for a comprehensive partner to expand our shelter capacity. We're having some ongoing conversations with existing service providers and even some providers that operate in other communities. We're trying to diversify the funding streams for supportive services. One of the things that our community hasn't historically done very well is leverage a lot of the state funding that's available to help with these programs. In the way that we become more competitive in that process is by partnering with our area service providers. And so we've been approached by people wanting to do some grant applications with the state to expand some capacity. And they've expressed tons of excitement about us being willing to support them in through my position and my support that I can give them, make them more competitive. We're also exploring a possible waiver to Medicaid. Other communities are able to bill for supportive services from the permanent supportive housing type of service. You can't bill for that through TennCare. And what we hear from our service providers is what they are able to bill for actually will only fund 20% of a permanent supportive housing position. So right now we have an 80% of that person's salary to try to figure out the funding short gap for. And we're also trying to create buy-in from people in our community to target the people who have who are vulnerable and are difficult to house. One of the great initiatives that we're partnering with the Fuse program on is by talking with houses of worship to think about innovative ways that they can foster creating housing. Other communities have had churches develop housing units, donate lands, kind of bring support around those congregations to get these vulnerable people housed. Any questions?
I think we asked a few along the way. Are there any
Mhm.
further questions?
I do have this
Council.
information that was covered in the slide in the form of a fact sheet. It's a little bit easier to digest too.
Yeah, can you send that around?
Mm.
Just a hard copy. Great. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sam, for this information. It's helpful to have some background and a roadmap of where you guys want to go. I'm glad that you brought up the House America 2 goals, because those were the 2 things I really wanted to know as we talked is, okay, so this is the problem, but realistically, where can we go with it? That, practically this campsite is something practical. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, but practically how many households? So you say 500 households, is that annually?
That's just for this year.
Okay.
And so
So that's for 2021 or that's for fiscal year 22?
For the year 2022,
Okay.
starting in December, or excuse me, January, ending in December.
Okay. And so the goal is to rehouse 500 households. And so would I be correct to think that that would be people experiencing episodic homelessness?
It include both.
Okay, so it could be people who are getting long-term supportive housing who are chronically homeless.
Correct.
Okay. And am I understanding that people who are in episodic homelessness have less need for supportive housing and more need just to find a affordable home?
Correct. And sometimes people may need light support, still kind of case management, linkage with services, but they don't tend to need as long-term care as people that need permanent supportive housing. And thus the interventions are just a lot cheaper.
And so the number of new units, you said 100 new units in 2022. Tell me what those units are.
Yeah, it could look like a variety of different things. We've been having conversations with everyone from development entities to nonprofit that have property portfolios that they manage. A great example of an agency that does that really well is the AIM Center. They have specifically AIM Housing that manages permanent supportive housing units, but also affordable housing units and a variety of units in their portfolio. And so I don't think it's going to be something where it's a one size fits all for this population. And we can't just build permanent supportive housing units without developing affordable housing units. We need a mix of those things for the population's needs to be met.
Okay, so yes, I follow that. So this does head into our overall affordable housing strategy, which is another conversation that deserves a lot of time and thought, and I know is getting a lot of that from the administration. But so you've told us that 364 people sleep outside in Hamilton County every night. And I've tried to get the numbers just as quick as I could, that we need 436 supportive housing slots. Now that, when you say that, I think of the FUSE program, potentially that type of high touch supportive housing, but it sounds like you're also talking room in the inn, AIM. Am I following?
Correct. Yeah. The way I always distinguish what FUSE is doing versus supportive housing unit, or what regular supportive housing does, is even within the population that needs supportive housing, there's different types of service that they need. And what the FUSE program is looking to bring is a very specific type of like their mental health service team and people that have severe and persistent mental health issues.
Okay.
Yeah, there's other kind of less acute populations that would need supportive housing, but not at that level.
Okay. So this 100 new units, what kind of dent are you expecting that to make in our rapid rehousing or in our supportive housing portfolio?
I think the question still is what percentage of them would be supportive housing units versus what percentage of them are going to be rapid rehousing dedicated. Because we don't have those projects fully realized yet, it's hard for me to break down what that percentage is going to be. Obviously, we want to try to incentivize supportive housing units being created because those are the units that are going to require the most subsidies and financial support around getting set up.
Can you provide us, please, with a census of all the different beds that we have through all of our partners?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just so that we can see at a glance, where the number that we have. I really took a lot of notes really fast with how many beds, so we have 316 shelter spaces. Like, where are they?
Mhm.
Who are they? And then what are our, does that include the room in the inn spots, the AIM spots, et cetera? I'd love to be able to see that and just have a better understanding of what those beds are.
Yeah, that's a little bit more detailed than the information I have here, but I'd be happy.
Right,
to put
I understand
together
that.
and get
Yeah,
to you.
yeah. Because we've got to know where we are to know where we want to head. And
Right.
we've had some interesting conversations as a body about homelessness and what is our capacity as a city to remedy or alleviate homelessness. Is there a functional zero that we're able to get to? And the Burke administration made a lot of efforts for veterans, and yet very much a point in time count. And it's, we've not won the war, right?
Absolutely.
And so, 300, to know that 364 people sleep outside every night, I wonder how many of those are chronic, how many of those are episodic, so that we as a body can start to get a better idea of what's the number that we want to get to, and how, because then you start thinking about resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of part of that, I appreciate you bringing up the Veterans Initiative. And one of the things that kind of one of the first steps we did in that process is establish that by name list, because we were able to accurately count right now in this moment, how many vets do we have experiencing homelessness. We're not able to do that yet for our overall homeless population, but we are able to tell, like, broadly speaking, if things are getting better or if they're getting worse. And so for us to be able to really answer those questions, to say what's realistic for us to try to reach in terms of number of people, housed, or the differences that we're going to make in our population, we have to get to that higher data standard. But we can still, in the meantime, know we're going to need housing units and these types of activities, and can begin to head in that direction.
Yeah, I guess as a leader in this community, I want to I want to see how we're making progress toward where we're going. And we've talked about this a little bit with our, our HUD money, things that we're doing, and we're getting there. Just know that I know you don't have it today, but I'd love for you to have it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I just wanted to pop in here and say too, that that higher data standard that Sam's talking about will require an investment in and of itself. And that's something that we're going to bring through council as a discussion point to say, if we want more visibility into this problem, we are going to need resources to commit to understand its full scope. Because right now, the capacity to understand the actual numbers is knowable. This is a knowable problem. It is just going to require one, staff capacity, and then two, some additional data resources from like a data management perspective, and some technical assistance to get done. And that's something I think is worth the investment, and the administration does too.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't make a list of what I'm going to get my kids for Christmas, the next shiny thing, I could go invest in that, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and I'm just trying to make a metaphor, whether it's a good one or not. So y'all know I'm all about a plan. Finally, thank you, and I look forward to hearing more. Can you please fill us in a little bit more about this campground idea?
Yeah, so we looked at the piece of property we have on 12th and Peoples. It's kind of ideally situated by a lot of the services. Community kitchen gives 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. For people, no questions asked. They also have shower facilities as well. And so any type of that in and of itself really concentrates people to the 11th Street area. If you drive down 11th Street, you can see a variety of people with tents set up, just trying to stay close by to those services. And the idea really kind of sprang up from the mindset of like, people are already located here. There's not anyone that's monitoring this site. There's a high level of crime that happens there. There's not really something that like we're able to control the garbage or other things like that. And so if we just had spaces that people could come in and request access to, we assign them this space and the spaces and can monitor it, we could cut down on the crime, cut down on the litter that's caused in the area for very small investment on the city's part, while we're trying to come up with some of these more long-term solutions. I think the best thing about the encampment is very flexible. For us, it's not us building a structure on 11th Street that's going to cost millions of dollars and takes years to realize. It's something that we can do right now and kind of test out to see if it's effective in our community. We're looking to partner with a service provider to manage the site for us. I've already had a couple of preliminary conversations with a few different sources that have expressed interest in that. So I'm hopeful that we're going to get a strong partner to work with us on it.
That's fascinating. So talk to us about bathrooms and hand washing, drinking water.
Yeah, there'll be all those facilities on site. And again, it won't be something that closes at 4. It'll be it'll be accessible 24 hours a day for people on the site there. So I think that's going to really help cut down on the problems of people defecating on 11th Street, not having access to those facilities.
Okay. I'll yield my time. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Chair. So many things to talk about.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sam, for the presentation. We know that this homelessness is growing, as your presentation showed us. But in Knoxville, like, it was a group of people that I know you've been looking at Denver, and they're a great state to look at on a lot of things. But just right up the road, an hour and a half away to 2 hours, Knoxville, what they've done with their homeless community is they built tiny houses for their homeless people to stay there. Now, I do understand that we may want to get to 0, but we're not going to be able to just totally eradicate homelessness. But I do understand the goal and what, and the things that you're suggesting that we need to do to get there. But with your program and also with Fuse, do you all connect those individuals back to their family members? Because a lot of times the veterans are getting funds, the people that are on, that are mentally challenged, those people are getting checks.
Mhm.
And they have people that's their overseer that gets those checks. So are you connecting them back? And part of that agreement is that you have to take care of those individuals.
Mhm.
And if they're not doing so, I mean, is there anything in place? Because you're just getting their money and just allowing them to, not be housed or food, or clothes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, when you talk about families of persons experiencing homelessness, there's can be a variety of barriers. Even people, as you mentioned, they're taking advantage of people and the resources they have. And so really what we try to do and what other people in the service community really try to do is improve those relations. Thankfully, most people, I feel like that of the families of people experiencing homelessness are just overwhelmed because they themselves don't have the resources to support those people. Like, for example, people living in subsidized housing legally cannot allow other people to stay with them. And so if you have a family member, if you're in public housing, you have a family member that's homeless, they could maybe sleep with you for a few nights, but that's not a long-term solution. And so we, in trying to support people, try to build those relationships. And I think giving the people experiencing homelessness, getting them housed helps mend those relationships in a lot of big ways.
Okay, so do you support the ones that don't want to be housed? A lot of them don't want to be housed, and
Mhm.
that's okay if they don't. But if we, make sure that they're good, somewhere to put the trash, use the bathroom, make sure they get water. I mean, they're not missing a meal for sure, because there's a lot of organizations that bring them food. But I mean, it's a concern for us all, but at the end of the day, it's about choice.
Right.
And if they choose to live on the land, it's not against the law
Mhm.
to do any of that, then we need to be respecting their choice
Right.
and just seeing what we can do, what services that they need to, enhance wherever they choose to live, like you said, with the tents. Or creating a safe space for them to be. And then we also get into the conversation about who wants it in their backyard. So people's in 12, like, okay, that may be an acceptable area. But then you talk about putting it out there in North Shore, it'll be a whole different discussion, even though we're saying homelessness is a problem. So are we just looking at certain areas to house them, or are we looking across the whole Hamilton County?
Yeah, I think it depends so much on the project, right? And I think it's really
Mhm.
not a one size fits all for any type of project we do. And so we're looking for a variety of solutions and sources. One of the things that you mentioned previously were kind of tiny homes, or people are more calling them cottages now. I think it's kind of more of a respectable term, but just any type of innovative solution like that to say, like, hey, like if we have a nonprofit partner that's really charged up and wants to provide that service for this population, that's something that we're willing to have conversations with, because we know not any one intervention is going to work, because not any one person experiencing homelessness is the same as someone else.
That's true. Because I mean, I don't know how you categorize homelessness. I guess if you're just physically sleeping outside, but it's people that are homeless that's just sleeping on people's couches. And that's, their grandmama houses, they auntie houses, they friends' houses. If you go to the housing developments, you're gonna see friends that people ain't supposed to be there. And all of us probably, unless you making up in the hundred thousands, then you pretty much a paycheck away from anything happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And I think that really, to illustrate your point, the way I always kind of describe it is homelessness is really the tip of the spear of poverty in our community. And so the more we have people that are living rent burden, as I showed earlier, the more likely they are to become homeless, and the chance that these numbers will continue to grow. And so it requires a more comprehensive strategy, to your point, Councilwoman Hill, about affordable housing and trying to lift people out of poverty in our community.
that's it. I'm glad. And I was getting to the point of poverty. Until we reduce absolute poverty, we're going to continue to have this cycle, this issue. We're going to continue to bring you up here to talk about, well, what's next? And we're getting the same story. It's administration after administration after. It's the same thing. So I guess I'm looking forward to the day to where the strategy that we come up with, that is actually implemented and we can see the results from it. But again, thank you.
Good, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Hill, did you have another? Your light was back on. Okay. Councilman Hester.
I think approximately in the 50s, and that number is gone down considerably in 2020.
Good, Councilman. Hey, Sam, thank you. I don't see any more lights. I do have one question. It's really more of a clarification. In the presentation, we saw a number of different measures. And so I saw units and I saw beds, and some of them, they were used together. Some were different sentences. are those fully interchangeable or not?
Nearly fully interchangeable. The way that when we talk about permanent supportive housing, they talk about it in the terms of beds, but that could look like there are chronic homeless families that need it. And so you would say
Right.
one bed is one household in that.
Okay, so that's how they're using it interchangeably. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was clear because there's a big difference between if somebody's literally thinking of a bed, but then
Right.
you do have a family of four, now you're into four rather than one unit. So I
Right.
just wanted to see how we're using that. Okay, great. Oh, wait, I do have one more line. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Chair, just a thought that this may be more for Joda or whoever else can answer it. When he's talking about low barrier shelters. And we have all this boarded up city property that we're saying we want to put it up for bid or whatever, but do we have any buildings that we could fix up and provide shelter for people, even if it's, during the cold winter months, or to give them permanent shelter rather than outsourcing it for somebody else to do, or
So it's a great question. And we've got a great team for real property that has looked at this. The answer is no, not really. We don't have extensive residential space that could accommodate both cold weather shelter that meet the some of the real estate needs that you need for a low barrier shelter. They need to be pretty close to some key services. They need to not be near an active elementary or middle school. There are challenges whenever you actually talk about what a low barrier shelter is. Low barrier, I mean, it's challenging, right? You talk about anybody being able to walk in and find a place to sleep. And so right now, the city of Chattanooga does not own ourselves a place that would be a good fit for that. That said, we've looked at some locations. I think the Kelly administration, however, has a choice to make in some ways. And I think that we've grappled with this, to be honest, which is, do we focus on the long-term solution, which is going to be permanent supportive housing and increasing housing capacity? Or do we spend a tremendous amount of money on shelter space? And that's a hard question because people are hurting right now. Part of the problem and part of the incentive for the way that we're sort of tipping toward the supportive housing piece is because getting a low barrier shelter stood up would take years. I mean, getting one set up, a formal structural shelter would actually be a long process. Whereas it would take about the same amount of time or even a little shorter to build in permanent supportive housing, which keeps people housed for longer. And so we are looking to, I mean, we're still having this discussion internally, but that I would say is that in that discussion, it's not that nobody would do the shelter piece. It's that we look to our partners external to the city who may be better suited to take on that low barrier shelter component, and maybe not all in one site, right? Where you don't have a huge site with, say, hundreds of, 200 people, but rather you have kind of multiple sites where nonprofits can take 20 or 30 at a time. Sam, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'll say, just add to that, is every single conversation that I've had with a larger metropolitan area with comparable programs, they've said to me, invest in housing. We've talked about how have you gotten shelter projects off the ground? They said invest in housing, because this is going to be those long-term investments, or if you can structure them correctly, are going to be permanent solutions that have years in operations versus a shelter that could just fill up. And if we don't have places to put people, they're just stuck in the shelter.
well, I tell you what, if we move towards the ADUs, approving them, and it's a shameless plug for mine, so I could put 2 in the back of my house on my property and provide housing. So, I mean, I had spoke to Leffel before. I got a homeless man that's living in the back of my shelter. And I, just so happened to stumble across him last year. He had been living back there for quite some time, and I connected him to some different resources and stuff. And but it's scary to just, go into your own house and you think that it's private, or outside in the shelter and you find somebody living there, and what do you do? Right? And if our resources are limited, do we, still continue to live there, or do you, some kind of protection? But we end up getting them housed. But I said all that to say this, is that you never know where they are. I mean, some people, they'll find that refuge or that space that, and if you're anything like me that don't go out there quite often, and there's no telling what that you will find. So even on your personal property, like, you know, wherever they feel like they want to lay their head, you know, that's what they're going to do. It is concerning, but, you know, I'm protected in our ways. But I do, you know, hope that we come up with some kind of solution to kind of help at least reduce it even more, even though, you know, I do understand we're not going to get to the zero, but it's worth it trying it.
All right, thanks, Councilwoman. All right, that's all I have. Sam, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, council, we went over our strategic planning items a little bit before this presentation. Are there any questions, any follow-ups, anything else to discuss during strategic planning? Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was late
You're good.
to the meeting, but let me get the item. Under finance, just for the record, I'll be not the Rescue Act. What line is it? For the city court judge,
Yes.
I will be withdrawing it. Then do I need to let that know in strategic planning, or you want me to wait till 3:30?
Yeah, you can announce it. I would do it at the 3:30 agenda.
Okay.
What your intentions will be at 6.
Okay.
All right, seeing no further lights, we will adjourn until 3:30.